Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful Today channel. I give you 1 week to leave my house. Eric says no to this wedding. Eric's throat like shrapnel from an explosion, weren't merely spoken, they were I give you 1 week to leave my house, a declaration detonated in the charged air of the once familiar living room, instantly shattering the fragile veneer of civility and transforming the space into a brutal arena where decades of simmering resentment, perceived betrayal, and raw, unadulterated fury finally found their volcanic release, a cataclysm that had been building pressure beneath the surface of strained pleasantries and forced smiles ever since the glossy, embossed wedding invitation, a symbol Eric saw not as joyous celebration but as a grotesque mockery of loyalty and a final, unforgivable insult, had landed with a sickening thud on his meticulously dusted mantelpiece weeks ago, an event that had ignited a slow-burning fuse now reaching its devastating terminus. This wasn't a request, nor a negotiation, it was a sentence, delivered with the cold, final authority of a judge who had already heard all evidence and found the defendant irredeemably guilty, a verdict etched in the granite hardness of Eric's jaw, the flinty spark of rage in his bloodshot eyes, and the rigid posture that seemed to vibrate with suppressed violence, a physical manifestation of the emotional dam bursting after years of holding back torrents of disappointment in choices made, paths chosen that diverged wildly from the shared history and unspoken codes Eric believed bound them, paths that led directly to this person, this interloper Eric viewed not as a future in-law but as a corrosive force, a usurper poisoning the wellspring of a bond he'd foolishly considered unbreakable. The sheer, brutal simplicity of the command, "Leave my house," carried the weight of eviction, stripping away any pretense of sanctuary, transforming the shared roof, the walls that had witnessed childhood secrets whispered in the dark and adolescent dreams fervently declared, into hostile territory, a physical extension of Eric's profound, visceral rejection, a rejection not just of the impending union, but of the very idea of it, a repudiation so absolute it necessitated the violent expulsion of its architect from the last shared bastion of their fractured connection. And then, before the stunned recipient could even draw breath to protest, to plead, to question the sheer insanity of the demand echoing off the family photos smiling obliviously from the walls, Eric delivered the second hammer blow, a blunt, brutal negation that slammed shut any door to reconciliation. Eric says no to this wedding, a statement so stark, so devoid of nuance or room for appeal, that it felt less like an opinion and more like a cosmic decree, an immutable law etched in stone by the sheer force of his wounded pride and possessive, twisted love. This no wasn't about gentle disapproval or cautious concern whispered over coffee, it was a guttural roar of negation, a refusal to sanction, acknowledge, or tolerate the event on any level, a denial of its validity, its right to exist within the sphere of what Eric considered his family, his legacy, his domain, a domain now explicitly defined by the 4 walls he commanded them to vacate. The possessive pronoun my house wasn't just a claim to bricks and mortar, it was a declaration of sovereignty, a reassertion of control over the only tangible thing Eric felt he still possessed amidst the perceived wreckage of their relationship, a desperate lashing out to reclaim agency in a narrative he felt was being stolen from him, rewritten without his consent into a story he found abhorrent, a narrative featuring that person standing frozen now, pale and trembling, caught in the crosshairs of Eric's wrath. The 1 week wasn't a grace period, it was a ticking clock, a brutal countdown imposed with military precision, a stark reminder of Eric's absolute power in this moment, in this space. It was the time allotted for packing belongings, for erasing physical traces, a cruel mimicry of legal eviction proceedings fueled purely by personal vengeance, a week designed not for reflection but for the slow, agonizing digestion of utter defeat and exile. The silence that followed the eruption was profound, thick enough to choke on, broken only by the ragged, uneven sound of Eric's own breathing, a harsh counterpoint to the stunned stillness of the person facing him, whose face, a mask of shock rapidly crumbling into a mosaic of disbelief, dawning horror, and a deep, searing pain, reflected the nuclear devastation Eric's words had wrought. In that silence, the ghosts of shared history seemed to wail, memories of Christmases with overflowing stockings, summers spent scraping knees on the driveway, whispered teenage confessions in the dead of night, the comforting mundanity of shared meals around the scratched kitchen table, all now rendered meaningless, casualties of this single, scorching moment. Eric saw the pain register, the tears welling, the mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish gasping on land, and a perverse, fleeting surge of grim satisfaction tightened his gut. Finally, they understood the depth of his conviction, the absolute seriousness with which he viewed this betrayal, this fundamental rupture caused by their choice, a choice Eric interpreted not as love but as a profound, personal insult, a deliberate spurning of everything he represented, everything he had implicitly demanded loyalty to. He saw not a beloved family member facing annihilation, but the embodiment of the perceived threat, the agent of change he was determined to annihilate before it could solidify its victory. His no to the wedding was intrinsically linked to the eviction. One was the ideological rejection, the other its physical enforcement, a brutal symmetry in his mind. The house, his house, could not be contaminated by the celebration or even the lingering presence of this unacceptable future. It was sacred ground he would purify through expulsion. The ultimatum wasn't born of sudden impulse, but from a deep, festering wound, perhaps jealousy disguised as protectiveness, perhaps a fear of being replaced or rendered obsolete, perhaps an inability to accept the autonomy of another, perhaps a love so possessive it had curdled into something monstrously controlling. Whatever the root, it had festered in darkness, fed by imagined slights and nurtured by stubborn pride, until the announcement of the wedding acted as sunlight, forcing the infection to the surface in this violent, suppurating outburst. The demand to leave wasn't just about physical space, it was a demand to erase themselves from his narrative, to vanish from the stage upon which Eric felt his authority and vision for their shared life was being usurped. The frozen figure before him wasn't just being told to pack bags, they were being excommunicated, their place in Eric's world revoked with terrifying finality. And Eric, standing rigidly amidst the wreckage of the relationship he himself had just dynamited, felt no remorse, only the cold, brittle certainty of his own righteousness, the conviction that this nuclear option was the only possible response to the existential threat posed by this wedding. The clock was now ticking, each second resonating with the deafening echo of his command, a countdown to an exile that promised not resolution, but only a deeper, more desolate chasm, a chasm dug by the two words that hung in the air with the weight of tombstones, leave and no. The foundations of family, of home, of shared history, lay in smoking ruins, and Eric, the self-appointed demolition expert, stood amidst the debris, mistaking the suffocating silence for control, the devastation for victory, unable or unwilling to see that in destroying the sanctuary, he had also entombed himself within the cold, isolating fortress of his own irreparable rage. The wedding bells, if they ever rang, would now chime over a profound and deliberate absence, a vacuum carved by the ultimatum echoing relentlessly in the hollowed-out space where trust and belonging used to reside. 1 week. 7 days. An eternity of suffocating tension compressed into a brutally finite span, marking the point of no return. 3 causes for Deacon and Taylor's upcoming romance. There may be a new romance developing between Deacon Sharp and Taylor Hayes. Given the possibility of a new relationship in the works, we ought to discuss all the ways that B&B could unite Taylor and Deacon. 1. Deacon is pushed too far by Sheila's treachery. Deacon loves, although Sheila Sharp has always shown promise, her most recent betrayal may seriously harm their marriage. Sheila has consented to conceal Luna Nozawa's survival and Lee Finnegan's secret, but that choice might ultimately work against her. Sheila found out she had a granddaughter and was keen to get in touch with her when Bill Spencer secured Luna's pardon. Sheila ignored Deacon's warning to avoid Luna and continued to see her behind his back despite his ultimatum. Even if Deacon was able to move over that error, it might not be that simple the next time. After Luna's beach house collapse, which almost resulted in Liam Spencer's death, the stakes are higher. Deacon will be incensed to learn that Sheila knew the truth and remained silent because everyone outside the Luna secret circle thinks she is dead now. Deacon might be tempted to divorce Luna in light of that and Sheila's forgiveness of her. 2. Taylor loses Ridge to Brooke and his fateful pairing. Her ideal wedding plans will become a complete nightmare because of Taylor. When Taylor wants to remarry Ridge Forrester and become the real queen of his heart, she won't get her desire. This time, Brooke Logan will prevail in the love triangle and receive the happy ending she desires. Although it will take some time, Brooke and Ridge's fate will eventually become clear. After that, Taylor will find herself searching for a way ahead while her entire world collapses. 3. Taylor and Deacon express sympathy for love disappointments. After their romantic partners disappoint them, Taylor and Deacon might offer some consolation. Is this the beginning of Deacon and Taylor's pairing? Many fans thought Taylor and Deacon might start dating before Rebecca Budig replaced Krista Allen as Taylor. At one point, it appeared as though the show was experimenting with a romance between Deacon and Taylor. If Taylor and Deacon are both going to become single, now might be a good time to review that plan. Deacon and Taylor might be able to start over romantically if they receive terrible news in their existing relationships. In the upcoming months, Taylor and Deacon will need to refresh their romantic life, so keep an eye out. The oppressive silence, thick as the dust motes dancing in the late afternoon sun slanting through the grimy living room window, was finally shattered not by the reasoned debate Sarah had desperately hoped for, nor the tearful reconciliation she'd foolishly imagined possible, but by Eric's voice, a low, guttural tremor that seemed to emanate not from his throat but from the very core of a seismic shift occurring within him. He'd been unnervingly still since she'd burst in, flushed with the giddy, nervous energy of impending matrimony, waving the absurdly oversized, glitter-encrusted wedding invitation like a white flag of surrender she mistakenly believed he'd honor, chattering breathlessly about floral arrangements, the questionable band choice, and Aunt Mildred's travel woes, completely oblivious to the gathering storm clouds darkening his features, the way his knuckles had whitened around the armrest of the worn leather chair, his chair, in his house, a fact suddenly imbued with terrifying significance, and when her words finally faltered, tripping over the palpable wall of his unspoken fury, he didn't shout, didn't lunge, he simply lifted his head, his eyes, usually warm pools of hazel now hardened into chips of flint, locking onto hers with a cold, terrifying finality that froze the rehearsed plea on her lips, the air crackling with the static charge before a lightning strike, and then it came. The sentence delivered with a chilling, deliberate calm that carved through the room like a scalpel, each word dropping with the weight of a tombstone sealing her fate. I give you 1 week to leave my house. The invitation slipped from her nerveless fingers, fluttering to the threadbare rug like a dying bird, the glitter mocking the sudden darkness. The words echoed, reverberating off the familiar walls that suddenly felt alien, hostile, shrinking in around her, the faded photograph on the mantel of them laughing at the beach, the chipped mug he always used for coffee, the faint scent of his aftershave clinging to the couch, all transformed into cruel relics of a past instantly invalidated by 7 brutal syllables. A week? It was an eternity compressed into a suffocating instant, a death sentence pronounced on the fragile illusion of home, family, belonging she'd woven around this place, around him. Her mind reeled, scrambling for purchase, for misunderstanding, for anything but this irrevocable decree. Was it the wedding itself? The fiancé he'd never warmed to? Some long-buried resentment she'd been too self-absorbed to notice? The frantic questions tumbled over each other, choked off by the sheer physical impossibility of breathing under the weight of his pronouncement. Eric, please, she managed, the whisper scraping her raw throat, you can't mean, the wedding. Jason, But he cut her off, not with a raised voice, but with a single, sharp, dismissive slice of his hand through the air, a gesture so final it felt like a door slamming shut. Eric says no to this wedding, he stated, the words flat, absolute, devoid of the heat of anger but radiating the deeper, more terrifying cold of absolute resolution. It wasn't just a refusal to attend, it was a renunciation, a severing of the ties that bound her presence here to his tolerance. No to the charade. No to him in my space. No to you pretending this, he gestured vaguely, encompassing the room, their shared history, the planned future, can coexist with that. The implication was horrifyingly clear, her choice was binary, irrevocable. Choose the wedding, choose Jason, and lose not just his blessing, but her very place in the only sanctuary she'd known since her own world had crumbled years ago. Choose to stay, and annihilate the fragile future she'd painstakingly built with Jason. There was no negotiation in his eyes, no flicker of the protective older brother who'd taken her in when she had nowhere else to go, only the steely gaze of a landlord, a judge, an executioner of her present security. The familiar contours of the room seemed to warp and tilt, the comforting clutter of shared life, his books stacked haphazardly, the blanket she'd crocheted draped over the sofa, the faint stain on the rug from that spilled wine years ago, now felt like exhibits in a museum of her imminent eviction, mocking reminders of a belonging revoked. A week. 7 days to dismantle a life, to find somewhere to store the physical detritus of years, but infinitely harder, to process the emotional eviction, the brutal withdrawal of unconditional support she'd taken for granted as her bedrock. The silence rushed back in, heavier now, saturated with the dust of shattered assumptions and the chilling finality of his ultimatum. He didn't look away, didn't soften, simply held her gaze, forcing her to absorb the full, desolate landscape of her new reality, the cold certainty in his eyes reflecting the icy dread solidifying in her own chest, the echoing emptiness of the house that was no longer, and never truly had been, hers. The ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway, a sound usually lost in the background hum of life, now hammered each passing second of her dwindling reprieve into her skull, a relentless metronome counting down the end of an era, the death of a delusion, and the terrifying, uncharted vacuum of what came next, all stemming from that single, devastating refusal, no. Sheila's ultimate betrayal shatters Deacon's hard-won trust. Deacon Sharp's journey is one of the show's most fascinating redemption arcs. From conman and criminal to a genuinely reformed man striving for respectability and love, his marriage to Sheila Carter represented his most audacious leap of faith. He saw, or desperately wanted to see, the flicker of goodness beneath her terrifying pathology. He championed her, defended her, and offered unwavering loyalty, becoming her unlikely anchor in a world that rightly reviles her. However, Sheila's inherent nature is betrayal, and her latest actions concerning Luna Nozawa constitute not just a mistake, but a fundamental violation of Deacon's core demand and the fragile trust underpinning their marriage. Deacon explicitly drew a line in the sand after Sheila's initial clandestine meetings with Luna, warning her that any further contact would be catastrophic. Sheila, driven by her obsessive need for connection and control, didn't merely cross that line, she obliterated it. Learning Luna was alive, keeping Lee Finnegan's secret, and then forgiving Luna after the near-fatal beach house incident involving Liam Spencer? This is a multi-layered betrayal of staggering proportions. Deacon, who fought tooth and nail for his own second chance and understands the gravity of consequence, will be apoplectic. The fact that Sheila concealed the truth while everyone mourned Luna's supposed death adds a layer of profound cruelty and deceit. This isn't just about disobedience, it's about Sheila prioritizing her own twisted desires over Deacon's explicit boundaries and their marital vows. It proves, definitively, that Sheila Carter is incapable of change. For Deacon, a man whose entire recent identity is built on honesty and trying to do right, this betrayal is the final straw. The fury won't just be explosive, it will be corrosive, eroding any remaining affection and leaving only the bitter taste of manipulation and broken promises. Divorce won't just be an option, it will feel like the only path to reclaiming his sanity and self-respect, leaving him emotionally adrift and profoundly disillusioned with love. 2. The crushing weight of destiny. Taylor's dream wedding becomes her recurring nightmare as Ridge returns to Brooke. Simultaneously, Taylor Hayes, the brilliant psychiatrist and perennial romantic, is poised for another devastating heartbreak. Her recent reconciliation and engagement to Ridge Forrester felt, to her, like a hard-won victory, the final chapter in their epic love story where destiny finally aligned. She envisioned her coronation as the true queen of his heart, a public and permanent affirmation of their soul-deep connection. Yet, the bold and the beautiful operates on an immutable law. Ridge Forrester's destiny, no matter how convoluted the path, ultimately leads back to Brooke Logan. Taylor's dream wedding preparations are merely the calm before the inevitable storm. Brooke's gravitational pull on Ridge is a fundamental force of the show's universe. Whether through a moment of weakness, a rekindled spark, a crisis that draws them together, or simply Ridge's own indecisive nature crystallizing into a familiar pattern, Brooke will win this round. The destiny narrative will reassert itself, leaving Taylor standing at the altar, emotionally if not literally, abandoned once again. This isn't just another loss, it's a soul-crushing confirmation of her deepest fear, that despite her brilliance, her loyalty, her sacrifices, and her enduring love, she will forever be second best to Brooke in Ridge's eyes. The humiliation will be public, the pain excruciating. It shatters not just her romantic hopes but her sense of self-worth, meticulously rebuilt after years of pain. This time, the devastation won't be met with quiet resilience alone, it will leave her profoundly lost, questioning everything she believed about love and her place in the Forrester dynasty. She won't just be single, she'll be emotionally raw, vulnerable, and searching for a path forward that doesn't involve the toxic Ridge-Brook-Taylor triangle that has defined her existence for decades. Her world won't just wobble, it will implode, leaving a void yearning for genuine connection and understanding from someone who doesn't see her as a consolation prize. 3. Commiseration blooms into connection, shared scars forge an unlikely, yet perfect, bond. This is where the alchemy between Deacon and Taylor becomes irresistible. Both will be reeling from profound romantic letdowns inflicted by partners they loved deeply but who fundamentally betrayed their trust and failed to prioritize them. Deacon, cast aside by Sheila's pathological selfishness, and Taylor, discarded by Ridge's inevitable return to Brooke, will find themselves in the unique position of understanding the other's pain on a visceral level. Their commiseration won't be a mere exchange of woes over coffee, it will be a recognition of shared emotional devastation. They both loved fiercely again.